Web design, but it's 1998 again. That's the theme. I was 13 in 1998, and for those who were roughly that age, or maybe a little bit older, will have a feeling of nostalgia in this video for sure. And those who are much younger, perhaps not even born yet, will still get to see some of the great stuff that happened in 1998. But 1998, who cares, right? That was 22 years ago. But you should care, because a lot of amazing things happened in the late 90s. So you have your sweet rock collection cataloged and photographed, and you're ready to get it on the internet to show everybody. What's the first thing you do? You find some hosting. Of course, Google's a brand new product in 1998, so you can't go Google it, you have to Yahoo search it. And if you were to Yahoo search for your website hosting, you'd probably stumble upon GeoCities. A lot of early websites I think were inspired a lot by published materials, things you'd find like newspapers and magazines and brochures. So this is why a lot of the early web design looks the way it does. And anybody that has an eye for design is probably going absolutely bananas right now. But GeoCities was a huge deal. It was a place to get a free homepage. They were so popular that Yahoo recognized what they were doing and they decided to buy them. It says Yahoo GeoCities has everything you need to create a great website for free. And really what they mean by that is just this WYSIWYG editor that was just a bunch of absolute position elements that you could put on the screen. Now in 2020, this sounds atrocious, but back in 1998, there were no smartphones, there were no tablets, and everybody pretty much used one of two browsers, either Internet Explorer 5 or Netscape Navigator, and then most people had one of two size monitors. They were either 640 by 480 or 800 by 600. Nearly every website in the mid to late 90s was a fixed size. It was typically like 780 pixels, and then often you'd have a phrase like, looks best on 800 by 600 resolution. Imagine telling users in 2020 that they had to use a specific resolution to use your website. That wouldn't fly today, but back then, no problem. But GeoCities, that's not going to cut it. We're a sophisticated web designer, we upload our own HTML, so what we're going to need is AngelFire. And AngelFire will give us an extraordinarily generous 5 megabytes of disk space. Now, of course, 5 megabytes is basically nothing. We have single photos today that are 3 times the size of that, but back then that was actually quite a bit. Because all people were uploading were just static HTML files with some low-resolution pictures here and there. Because remember, back in 1998, there was no node modules, there was no crazy dependency trees and hundreds of megabytes worth of stuff. And there weren't even a ton of digital photos because of the process it took to get digital photos on a website in the late 90s. Remember, digital cameras were not mainstream, so if you wanted a photo on your website, you had to take a Polaroid version and then use a scanner and then put it on your website that way. And old scanners weren't that great and the pictures weren't that big to begin with, so 5 megabytes could probably get you a couple hundred photos, I would say. So we got some disk space, it's time to make our website, but how do we even learn about HTML? Well, we can go to Stack Overflow doesn't exist yet. We gotta do things the old-fashioned way. HTML4 for dummies. You might laugh, but this is how it was done in the mid to late 90s. You took some of that birthday money your grandma gave you and you went down to the bookstore and you bought an HTML4 book. If you wanted to do web programming, you also bought an ASP book or a Perl CGI book. There was all kinds of excellent technology that came out in the late 90s. XML1, HTML4, CSS2, Internet Explorer 5, Adobe Photoshop 5.5, not CS5, but 5.5, PHP 4, and then Macromedia, Dreamweaver, and Flash 1.0, of course, and then of course JavaScript. And of course Photoshop, Dreamweaver, and Flash you pirated from like eDonkey or LimeWire because you were a teenager, you couldn't afford it. You could get away with a lot of that back then. This was around the time where they squashed Napster and a lot of the other peer-to-peer sites. So we got our tools, we got our books, let's build a site. For a background, the white background's not going to cut it. We're going to introduce some like blue tileable background that you make in Photoshop. That looks great. Having a site in 1998 that's an eyesore is no big deal. Remember, we don't have to worry at all about responsive design, so we could just create a new div called content and then just lock that into 780 pixels and we're good. Obviously this site is about my dog, so we want to make a loud and proud title, that way nobody forgets it. One popular thing to do was to mark your site as under construction so everybody knows that you're currently working on it. Obviously a static image would do, but the animated ones are the best. And no need for responsive design, doesn't matter how big or small we make this, it doesn't change. You really weren't cool unless you had a marquee tag with some sliding text along your site, so we're going to put come back for new pics daily. We're just going to slide that across the screen. That's probably not big enough. I think we can do better. How about 32 pixels? Ah, yes, that's much better. The main content for the site, of course, is the pictures of Chase, so we'll just add a bunch in from mydogchase.com. If this was authentic, of course, a lot of these would be blurry, but that's okay. At the bottom of the page, we want 2 columns of content, and the most common way that people did that back then was using tables. Of course, today we'd use Flexbox, but we didn't have that back then. We had to create a table, and then a row, and then 2 columns. In the first column, we gotta put a link to our guest book because we want everybody to go sign our guest book. I used to bug everyone, mostly my family, to sign my guest book for all the sites I made. And in the right-hand column, we're going to put two things. The first thing is going to be a hit counter. You always need a hit counter, and every time you went to the page, it would just refresh and add 1 to your hit counter. There's no feeling quite like going to bed at night, waking up in the morning, and seeing the hit counter be 8 more than it was the previous night. And last but not least, you want everybody to have the absolute best experience possible on your site, so you create a best viewed with link, and it should link to Microsoft Internet Explorer, a free download. And that's everything. Site's looking pretty sharp if I do say so myself. You might think that I'm just exaggerating a little bit with what I built here, but this is actually the kind of sites that were produced back then. There were tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of sites that looked exactly like this in the mid to late 90s. And that's because everyone had brand new tools and brand new capabilities, and they were just expressing themselves in ways they simply couldn't before. Back then it was great because there was basically no competition. Of course, in the 22 years that followed after this, the internet just exploded with new services. There's literally everything on the internet now. Anyway, that's pretty much it for our site. If any of this video resonated with you or you have a fond memory of the mid to late 90s that you'd like to share, please leave that below in the comments. And other than that, I hope to see you in the next video where we'll be back to 2020. Take care.